This is the Dungeon Master's Handbook. Hello and welcome. I'm Michael Shorten, also known as Chicago Wiz, and this is episode 34, Demystifying Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and we're going to be talking about Evasion and Pursuit. This episode represents a bit of an experiment. For those of you that are listening to the podcast, I'm also live streaming the actual recording for the first time. If you are watching on Twitch right now, or if you stopped by to watch, thank you. Let me know what you thought. I really hope you all are doing well in these times. This is really pretty hard. I have my wife, my son, and 2 granddaughters here with me, and we're making do as best we can. Kids are doing remote learning. I'm working from home. I'm lucky enough to be able to do that, and the same as my son, but it's pretty hard. I've been gaming a lot more, surprisingly, both as a DM and as a player. I've been playing in Carl Rodriguez's Broken Lands game. Now, this is a game that's hosted on the Audio Dungeon Discord. He runs it every Monday night. And what's unique about this is we are actually playing humanoid races of orcs, goblins, kobolds, and bugbears. It's based on one of the Mystara Gazetteers, I think number 10, the Orcs of Thar. And it lays out how you can be, a humanoid PC player. And it's been a really fun campaign. I've also started playing in an AD&D play-by-post hosted by Starbeard, and he is from the AD&D 74 Pro boards. So you've probably heard me refer about that wonderful little corner of the internet a time or two on previous episodes. He wanted to have a drop-in, drop-out kind of game on Discord doing his play-by-post, so I hopped in and having fun. I also find that I'm running quite a few more games than I thought I would be. My regular monthly AD&D tabletop campaign just went virtual this past Sunday. We had a great game. Everybody, or a lot of people got together. We did it over Zoom and Roll20. Technology seemed to work out okay. Everybody, got a little used to it, but it was a fantastic game. And my bi-weekly Tuesday game on Roll20, which I've been doing for over a year now, that's still going really well. Let's see, I'm also running my family 5th edition campaign, my wife's one-on-one AD&D campaign. That happens about every couple of weeks or so. We're due for another game soon. And I'm also running some mini campaigns and one-shots. And the 3 play-by-post games that I'm running also have gotten a couple of new players, and there's lots going on there. Whew. I am doing a lot. So a lot of gaming, no miniatures painting. So yeah. So anyway, let's dive into the topic of this episode, which actually comes from the AD&D subreddit group on the website Reddit. A user by the name of, I'm going to probably mispronounce this, dasberjuden31 asks, and I'm going to paraphrase the question here. I've been reading over the rules for pursuit in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and they seem needlessly complex. How do you easily determine if a group of enemies will pursue your players when they flee? How long do the enemies pursue until they give up? Do you have a simplified system in place for determining how much distance is between the enemies and players and how quickly that gap is closed? I've been over the rules so many times I have a headache. I just keep thinking there has to be an easier way. Those are great questions. And to be honest with you, what I love about seeing some of these questions is it gives me a chance to really dive in deep and look at what are the rules as written, see what maybe I've missed, and think about what I do in my game. So I've kind of done both. I've done the rules as written, and I have a somewhat simplified system that I use, and I'm going to share all of that with you. But first, let's go to the Dungeon Master's Guide and take a look at the rules as written. So for those of you that are first-time listeners, I only use the core rules of AD&D First Edition in my campaign. So far, I don't include anything from Unearthed Arcana or Dragon magazines unless there's been a lot of discussion, unless I do play testing, and unless it's something that is really a need in my campaign, because the house rules that I do have are tuned to make AD&D in my homebrew setting mesh. It reflects things that I've chosen for my setting, such as how I handle paladins, for example. I do have variations to the core rules, but by and large, it's my own creation or inspirations that I've gotten from various places. I've never saw a reason or been interested in including Unearthed Arcana or any of the many Dragon magazines, but it may happen. Anyway, so we're going to look at the rules as written, and Pursuit and Evasion are found on page 67 through 69. Now, it breaks it down into two possible scenarios. Is the Pursuit and Evasion taking place in a dungeon setting, or is the Pursuit and Evasion taking place in the outdoors? So Dungeon Pursuit, by the rules, works like this. First, you figure out the encounter parameters itself. So, was either party surprised? How far away are the groups from each other? The usual things that you do by the rules. And then you ask some questions. If the PCs are wanting to run the way, will the monsters pursue? And the way the rules are written is it's based on maybe the dungeon key says that, for sure they're going to pursue, or maybe they're never going to pursue. If you don't have a specific scenario, then you look at the monster's intelligence and the situation that you find yourself in. What are the party sizes? What's the likelihood that the monsters could overcome the PCs, and so on? There's some different variations and questions to ask in the rules. And then you throw dice to see, will the monsters actually pursue? And it's based on a percentage. If pursue happens, then you have to look at who is faster, because who is faster is going to dictate how long pursuit happens and under what conditions it may end. If pursuit is happening, then there are things that can happen that will cause distractions. Things like the PCs using doors, perhaps they'll quick slam a door shut. Or distractions, maybe they're going to drop food, drop treasure, drop the halfling, whatever they're going to try to do to shake the monsters chasing them. For each round, what you're supposed to do by the rules is you map out comparing the slowest PC to the fastest monster. Now, that probably means that if you have a mixed group, your party's going to end up spread out with your speedy people down the hallway and your heavily laden paladin who's in plate mail and is only moving 3 inches around is lagging far behind. But when the fastest monster catches up with the slowest PC, then you've got combat. Also, in a dungeon pursuit, you're not mapping. You're describing the layout to the players, and you're running down a corridor, there's a door to your left, you keep going, yes, okay, you come to a chamber, there's an exit in front of you, the exit to the left, which way you're going to go. You don't describe anything unless it's something that would physically stop them. So that's Dungeon Pursuit. On the surface, it doesn't sound too complicated, but when you get into the rules, it can seem a little overwhelming. But let's take a look at the rules as written for Outdoor Pursuit. Now, interestingly, you would think that Outdoor Pursuit would maybe be more complicated, but it's not. It's actually a lot more simply stated. First, you figure out the encounter scenario. Again, is there surprise? How far away are you from each other? And so on. And if it's not a case of surprise, then you have a math problem to figure out of the percentage of someone evading pursuit. So let's say the PCs wanted to evade pursuit. There's a base 80% chance that they might be able to evade an encounter outdoors, but it's modified by 4 things. The comparative speed, so, who's the fastest, the terrain that you find yourself in, the size of the parties, and then what are the lighting conditions. And so you adjust your base chance based on those factors. And there's, again, it's on page 69. It's a very simple chart, maybe about a paragraph long. And then you roll your D100. If you get equal or under that modified percentage, then that means that evasion was successful. Otherwise, you're supposed to recheck every hour to see if did the pursuers catch up, maybe because they're faster, or you recast the dice and see if evasion continues or if they were successfully evaded. Now, interestingly, because what comes to mind might be the pursuit in the Two Towers, where Gimli and Aragorn and Legolas are pursuing the orcs from Isengard, who are carrying, actually be Uruk-hai of Isengard, who are carrying away the Pippin and Merry. And, they're running and running and running for hours and days, it seems like. The Dungeon Master's Guide doesn't give any guidance on that. There's nothing about what fatigue is, when you're going to get fatigued, when you will, hit exhaustion. They leave it as an exercise to the DM to figure out, which, okay, then that does give you a little bit of possibility. Maybe you do want it to be fantastic to where you could have somebody run for hours on end, or maybe you want something a bit more realistic. So those are the two scenarios. That's the way the rules is written, lay them out. It can be a little complex because the way the rules give it, pursuit and evasion become a type of a mini game. How fast are you going versus your pursuers? What kind of terrain are you in? If you're underground, are you going to run to a door and slam it shut? And so there's all kinds of things that you can do during that. And they lay out some guidelines on dice rolls to use. Because it's AD&D, and because we're in the first edition and we're talking about High Gygaxian, I think that reading those rules might make it a little overwhelming to have to figure all this stuff out and run the pursuit evasion minigame, especially if you're coming from a more modern environment where all of this stuff may be summed up with a couple of dice rolls, or you come from, say, a basic D&D approach where things are pretty simple. In fact, when you read the 1981 Moldvay Basic Expert D&D rules, really pursuit and evasion comes down to two things. First, is it a monster reaction check? Do they pursue or not? Secondly, who is faster? And if the PCs get out of sight, then they evade. And really, that's about all there is to it. Now, here's another interesting point while I was researching this. A lot of times when AD&D is complicated and complex, whether because of the rules being spread out all over the place or just the language, I use Osric. Now, Osric, being a modern retro clone, quite often will lay things out in a language that helps to clarify maybe what the first edition rules had. But in this case, Osric has absolutely nothing about pursuit and evasion. The only thing they mention is that one has to rest for a couple of hours after pursuit and evasion occurs. Thanks a lot, guys. So getting to the question of what do I do? So I've done the rules as written for outdoor pursuit. In fact, I just did it recently with one of my solo play-by-post games. And the reason I do it, the rules as written for outdoors, because it's really easy. It's just a table. It's just a percentage roll with some modifiers. And it's a pretty straightforward calculation. So let me give you an example. And this is from the game I did. The PC is Beleldur. He is on horseback and he's riding through the plains of Eresia on a solo scouting mission. It's midday. He encounters a group of 12 goblins riding on wargs, and I determined that neither group was surprised. So according to the rules as written, for an outdoor encounter, you can be anywhere from 6 inches to 24 inches apart. And in this case, the distance between the two groups was 19 inches. Well, Beleldur decided that since he's by himself, and discretion being the better part of valor, he decided to evade. So I looked at what the speeds were. Now, Beldur's horse was a light war horse, which moves at a speed of 24 inches. The wargs moved at a speed of 18 inches. So, got all that set up. Now let's figure out what is the likelihood of evasion happening. The base chance, according to the rules, is 80%. In this case, the first thing I'm going to look at is the movement speed. So since Beldur is faster, that gives him a bonus of 10%, so now it's 90% likely that he's going to be able to evade. What's the terrain? It's plains, open grasslands. That penalizes that check by 50%, so now the base chance is 40% that Beldur is going to be able to evade. Since Beldur is only one person, he gets a bonus of 10%, so now we're up to 40%. The total number of creatures, goblins and wargs, is 24, so now we're going to deduct 20% from that chance of evasion, so now we're at a base of 20. Okay, got that? It takes a little going, and I'm going here. I got the math. Yeah, 40. Yeah. So we were 50. So it's actually 30% chance of evasion. Now it's full daylight, so deduct another 30% from the modification, which now puts us at 10% of a chance of evasion. I did the roll. Beldur did not get 10% or less, so he cannot evade the goblin party, so now it's a matter of speed. Now, to be honest with you, I jotted this down on a piece of paper, went over the math twice when I did it, and that's how it turned out. Remember that in the case of pursuit, the pursued party moves at its slowest rate, and the pursuers moved at their fastest. Here, though, I didn't have to keep track of the mix-out because there was only one in one party, Beldur, who was in a faster horse, and I had the slower where it was the wargs and the goblins, but they were all at relatively the same speed. So Beldur, for that hour, was able to keep the distance between him and the wargs. In fact, he was able to increase it because of his faster speed. The rules say that you recheck after every hour, and if for whatever reason the result is 0 or less, meaning that there's absolutely no chance of evasion, then a confrontation happens. Now, I don't think that's correct as it's written. I really think that what they meant is that if the adjusted chance is 0% or less, pursuits are going to be automatic. The PC is not going to be able to evade. So we got the situation. The goblins are chasing Beldur. Slowly and slowly, the goblins are falling behind. At what point, then, do the monsters give up? Well, the rules really don't say. They assume you're going to keep rolling this until evasion happens. I don't agree with that. So I usually add in a monster reaction check to see what they're going to do. Now, my reaction checks are based on 2d6. They are based on the basic expert rules. It's just something that I've kept. AD&D uses percentage rules with a lot more modifiers. I haven't adopted that yet. So in this case, because Beldur was faster, after that hour, I did a check on the goblins. Do they feel like they have a chance to catch up to Beldur? Well, no, they can see him getting further off in the distance, so it was less likely that they were going to be able to pursue. I rolled the check. They actually did make it, so another hour passed. I checked again, and this time the goblins did not choose to continue pursuit, so I broke it off. Whew. That's quite a bit to have to do, and again, it's a little bit of a mini game there, which is okay. You know, it doesn't have to be dry and boring. You know, you can throw some things in there as a DM, you know, asking the players, hey, what are you going to do to maybe help your chances of evading? How are you going to deal with the situation? And so on. Now, remember that I said that the Dungeon Master Guide is vague on handling fatigue. What I do is I make an assumption that the more you run, the slower and slower you're going to get, especially outdoors. Indoors, and we'll hop to example of that real quick. That tends to be over a lot more quickly, more confined space. There's a lot tighter restrictions on how far away you can get before pursuit is automatically broken off. So usually it's a matter of a few rounds. But outdoors, you could go for hours. So I have a rule of thumb. Each hour of evasion and pursuit, you deduct a cumulative inch from their movement rate. So the first hour running, you deduct an inch from the movement rate of both parties. In this case, after 1 hour then, Bel Elder is going to be moving at 23 inches. The Wargs will be moving at 17 inches. Hour 2, you deduct 2 inches. So now, instead of being 23 and 17, it's going to be 21 and 15. Hour 3, you deduct 3 inches, and so on. If you get to the point where they hit 0 inches, then they're completely exhausted and they cannot move anymore. They have to rest. I believe the Dungeon Master Guide gives me, I think it's a couple of hours on. I'd have to find that. It's in the outdoor movement. If they get into combat while they're exhausted, then combat's going to be a lot harder. Usually I'll penalize them maybe with a -2 to a -4 on to hit for melee and missile fire. Now, I don't necessarily do this for every outdoor encounter. I kind of play it by ear. Is this something that is going to be cool? Is it something that makes sense? Or is it more likely that the monsters are going to look at the size of the PCs and go, nope, we're not messing with them? Is it more likely that the monsters may be successful? If the PCs are slogging through a deep forest and they stumble on some monsters who are woodland creatures very adept at going through a forest, then maybe it's more likely that they might pursue versus here out in the plains when the goblins could see that they were never going to catch up. I like to let the monster reaction roll dictate to me what's going to happen. And then usually what I'll do is depending on the situation, I either have to roll really high for them to continue pursuit or roll really low for them to decide that they're going to let it go. Okay. With me so far? Now let's talk about indoor evasion. How do I handle that? That one's a little tricky because I kind of agree with my Reddit user friend that the way the rules are spread out, there's almost 2 solid pages of information on what you have to think about. Now, a lot of it is just rules like on, hey, here's how to handle if there's a door in the way. Here's how to handle if you're dropping food and treasure. And that's nice, inspiration for the DM to grab to. For me, then I use kind of the same approach that I do for the outside. Is there a speed difference? What is the situation? And what's the monster's reaction check initially off? And I keep 3 things in mind. If the monsters are likely to pursue based on the situation, then I'll use the 2d6 reaction roll to decide. If the situation favors the monster, then I have to roll low, meaning a bad reaction for them not to pursue. Maybe they just decided they didn't want to do it. If the situation favors the PCs, the PC have a very strong party or they're in a tactically better position, then I have to roll high for the monsters to decide that they will pursue should the PCs decide to run. Point number 2 I keep in mind. If the pursued are faster than the pursuer, so if the PCs are running and they're faster than the monsters, once they get 100-foot separation or 5 rounds have passed, then the monsters give up. If the pursuers are, that's point 2. So point 3 is if the pursuers are faster, then the PCs need to do one of 2 things. They need to somehow physically keep the pursuers from continuing to pursue, meaning they're slamming doors shut, they're throwing treasure down, they're throwing food down to distract the pursuers. And by doing that, they need to get 200 feet of separation. Once they do that, then pursuit is broken off. And really, when you get down to it, that is the rules as written simplified. I just don't do a lot of the extra stuff. I try to keep it simple in my head. Now, I do, though, have to kind of keep track on the map, who's fast, who's slow, because especially in a dungeon, usually you've got a couple people that are really fully encumbered, and you've got other people that are not. So, what's the old saying? I don't have to be the fastest, I just have to be faster than you. Well, that probably applies here too. So then that brings us to a logical question. What if the PCs are pursuing? What if the PCs and a monster have an encounter and the monsters decide to run based on the reaction check and the PCs say, hey, we're going to chase them down? Pretty much the same thing. Look at the speed difference, look at the situation, and base it on a monster reaction check. Now here, though, it's not up to the dice whether the pursuit is going to be broken off. It's really going to be up to the PCs. Do they wish to continue or not? And here, then, I'm probably going to go to the rules as written and look at, what's the amount of separation, what is, the likelihood that they did evade, and so on, so that, because it's not up to me. If the pursuit continues, it's up to the PCs. So I stick to the rules as written in that case. So that's a lot that we've talked about. And just to sum up and to answer the question from Das Berjuden 31, for me, pursuit and evasion are a mini game. I will run it as the rules are written, when the situation lends itself to that. Ultimately, though, the mini game is just about the speed of the parties and what's the situation that they find themselves in. And I think if you keep that in the back of your head, this won't be as complex as maybe it might seem. Just remember that outdoor evasion is an hourly check. You're going to check to see if evasion happens, and if not, then you can consider using monster reaction and the speed difference to ultimately decide if the monsters are going to continue pursuing or if they're going to break off pursuit. Indoor evasion is more of a round-by-round combat situation, so every round that pursuit is happening, I'm going to be tracking that out. But here again, it's about what's the monster's reaction to the situation, how far they go and how far can they see, and if there's any speed difference and any physical obstacles to dictate whether the pursuit continues or not. All right, that's it. So what do you think? How have you handled pursuit and evasion? I'd really like to hear back from you. Thank you to my listeners for stopping by. Thank you to those who are on the stream checking this out. I hope you've had fun. I know these are hard times, and I hope my little podcast helps to bring you a little bit of distraction and fun. Maybe, take your mind off of being sheltering in place, as well as continuing to give you some insights on how AD&D works. If you'd like to leave a comment or feedback, you can contact me through a voicemail message or an online voice message. I'll leave the different ways to do that in the show notes. Coming up next in future episodes, I'm going to be talking about illusions. I have an illusionist in my campaign now, and we did Phantasmal Force for the first time, and it was a very interesting situation. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you, as well as looking at Unearthed Arcana. I think I might bite the bullet and read the book, and you will get to listen to me going through it section by section, and I'll share with you my thoughts and comments and how badly I think it's broken. All right, that's it. Until next time, game on. Hi, everyone. Just a quick addendum to this episode that you just listened to, and thanks for listening. You may have noticed a constant pounding sound in the recording. I apologize. I was trying something new. I had a different setup, and my Yeti microphone is ridiculously sensitive, and apparently I'm not allowed to touch the table that it's mounted on. So I apologize for that. We'll figure it out and get it right next time. I tried to filter it out as best I could. Anyway, that's about it. Thanks a lot again. Game on.